Everybody, welcome to the Employer Content Show, which is part of the Talent Insights series brought to you by Hire Well and Career Well. I'm your host, James Hornick. Joining me is my co-host from Job Portraits, employer brand aficionado, Nate Guggia.
Hey, thanks, man.
One aficionado this time. You like that?
Thank you.
All right. So today's segment is just to give everyone some context. We're calling upgrading your recruiting data less quantitative, more qualitative. Before we start, I just kind of want to do a lead in because this is actually probably the appropriate time to mention it. So this is the Employer Content Show. What I've been working on for the past several weeks is Talent Insights is kind of what we call all of the content we do at Hire Well kind of combined. And we're working on building out several different shows. So I think of like Talent Insights as like the channel. And then Employer Content Show, the 10-minute talent rant, adventures in job seeking are very different shows we have kind of on our channel. And you can find them all on our YouTube. We'll have the Hire Well YouTube, where we'll have them on different playlists. You can find them all on the Talent Insights podcast, which Nate, this is your third time on the talent. You are the most you're the most frequent guest as the third timer. But for this show in the future, I want to have these different shows because I realize like the space we operate in is very broad, and I actually have a lot of different interests. I don't want to be just talking about recruiting or just talking about job seeking. There's a lot of things that I find personally interesting, but I think that our audience is going to find interesting too. And Nate, obviously you're so I think what you and I talk about the most is stuff related to content. Like you and I both love employer content, personal content, and how companies can kind of do it better. And that's what we're going to start talking about on this first show.
Great. Sounds good.
So, all right. Employer branding metrics. Let's just kind of kick us off here. Like, this is your field. This is what your area. What do you guys track? Like, how do you guys measure this stuff, and what are your clients doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fuzzy topic. I think there's varying opinions about how to track this stuff, and like what actually really matters versus like what are vanity metrics, and things like that. Like what actually leads to results. And so if we're looking at employer branding content, I mean, like one of the things is like, for the most part at companies, employer branding sits really close to recruiting. It's in many ways sales enablement for recruiting. It is very much designed to make recruiters' lives easier, or at least it should be. But it's like, how do you measure like the ROI of that, especially like of awareness, which is really challenging to do. And I think that, if we're looking at like numbers, like quantitative data, things like, reply rates to outbound messages, which most of our clients, that's their primary way of recruiting, is outbound to passive candidates. So like, are you getting an uptick in replies from the right people? Measuring quality is really challenging, but I look at it like, if employer branding is lead gen, what matters there? And it really matters. Like, to me, I don't think clicks and impressions and things like that really matter. I don't think it's telling the real story. What's telling the real story is the information that recruiters get when they talk to candidates. And it is what candidates feel when they meet your employer brand, right? Whether that might be through outbound messaging, it might be through or an organic channel, whatever. When they come across your brand, like, what are they feeling? And if you can understand that and like really tap into that feedback, you can create more of what candidates want, and you can be like, buzzword, deeply empathetic though, but to what a candidate wants, and start creating more of those things as opposed to just creating the things that you want them to see. I think there's too much shiny object, look at us type content, instead of things that are answering candidates' most pressing questions and giving them the information that they want so they can choose if they want to apply and move forward or not. And so when I look at that, I look at qualitative data as actually being the marker that companies should like really look for. And the way to do that is you talk to candidates and you talk to your recruiters. If you're leading employer branding, you should be doing UX research interviews with candidates on the market that you're not trying to recruit. I sound like a broken record because I talk about this so much, but it's so important, because if you can interview them to find out what they want and what they care about, you can create things for them. And by talking to your recruiting team on a regular basis, you can have a feedback loop, because if a recruiter says, I talked to a number of candidates this week who all said that this piece of content compelled them to want to have a conversation with us. That's working, but there isn't that type of feedback isn't going to be tracked in a piece of software. It's tracked in a conversation. And so if you're leading employer branding, like those should be primary like processes that you have in place. And you should be talking to recruiters on a regular basis, and you should come in with questions to get the feedback that you want so you can do more of that work. And you should be talking to candidates because their behavior is continually changing. I just don't think numbers don't tell the real story. I think conversations tell the real story.
Yeah, let me provide some context to that, because what you're talking about, it's hard to argue against, but it's also, I think most companies haven't really wrapped their head around it. And here's kind of what's happening. So there's a difference between hiring and between recruiting, right? Recruiting is a subsect of hiring. So if companies want, like, hiring includes, okay, what do we need to hire? What's the business need? What kind of person we need to fill it? Creating that concept and that construct of like what the ideal candidate and skill set and whatnot look like, then actually filling of those roles, that's when recruiting comes in. Mm-hmm. So there's an inherent backseat that recruiting takes from a strategic standpoint, because the most strategic part of it, like what do we need to hire for, isn't talent acquisition teams aren't determining that, right? They might be giving feedback to that. They might saying, okay, this is not realistic or whatnot. The thing is that, traditionally, and I'm saying back it up, 10, 20 years, it was just, things have changed so much, right? Recruiting metrics came from a point where, recruiting metrics are typically just very sheer output focused, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not how you hire as an organization, it's just how it's filling bodies, right? It's like if you're a recruiter in an internal firm, or you're managing a talent acquisition team, you're oftentimes getting graded on like your time to fill, just getting, what your open rec count is, how fast you're able to get through it. You're typically grading your recruiters on how many open recs they have, how fast they can get them filled, how many candidates are getting in the process, how many they're screening through, like those types of things. Now, the thing is that like hiring has made a huge shift in the past 10, 20 years, right? Like look at all the things we find important now that back then we probably didn't, like anything like employee satisfaction, employee engagement, anything related to DEI. These are topics that just like 20 years ago, they weren't like, that was back in the days where like you were happy to have a job and go somewhere else if you don't like it. And people stayed at jobs long. It was a different mindset, right? Yeah. But you have all these different factors, and they're all positive, but that have changed in hiring. So these are things that we find important in the hiring process. But in a lot of companies, they still grade the recruiting part the same way they always did, like that old school. So you've got like newer thinking on the front half of the hiring process, but the recruiting process still may have a very kind of antiquated view of at least how they're grading people. So, you can tell your recruiting team that, you find all these new things important, but if you're not actually like changing how you're rating their performance, what difference is it going to make? Yeah. That's my take. And I'll give you an example. So time to fill. Mm-hmm. So I will say, I'm not going to take a complete dump on time to fill, because it's not a worthless metric, but it's not as valuable as people think. So time to fill, it tells you when you're doing something wrong, but it doesn't actually tell you when you're doing something right. It measures how fast you can find a body to put in the position. That's all it really measures, right? Yeah. So like if your time to fill is really long, like it's okay, either it's great, like something's wrong. It's unrealistic expectation of the job. You have a bad process. You have a lack of resources. Your company sucks and people don't like it. Like there's something glaring that you have to fix. Mm-hmm. But if something's right, like you could be recruiting for the position. You could get someone to say yes, and they start the job, but it could be the wrong person. You could be filling the wrong role that you didn't actually need. It might not be aligned at all with any DEI initiatives you have, if you have them. So there's just, and I think if you look at kind of all the recruiting metrics, it's very similar in that they're very short-sighted, but it's still how most organizations are kind of grading recruiting, because there's still that kind of break between, what the hiring part of the process and kind of the job determination versus, the people being asked to go out and do it. They're dumbing it down to kind of those black and white metrics and not all these other things we find important nowadays. Mm-hmm. my take.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I've been wondering about that time to fill one.
But it's like it doesn't, if you can have a great time to fill rate and you could still have bad employee engagement, you could still have not, so, rec load is another one, when you think about it, like it's completely subjective. In one organization, 10 having, 10 recs per recruiter might be fine, but it might be fine for the person working on junior mid-level roles, but someone else is working strictly on executive roles, so there's a lot of things that, rec load directly impacts the quality of a recruiter's work in terms of, like, you want to talk about ghosting as a problem. Ghosting comes from two things: bad process or technology, or from overworked people. That's it. So you can throw more and more at your recruiters and say, like, hey, our recruiters can handle a huge rec load. They're getting these roles filled, but are they really extending what you're looking for in the value of the brand because you're working the death? Like, they're getting it done, but are they really? So
yeah. Okay, I have a question for you. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How would you track quality? And what does quality mean? I don't know. Do I need to get into what quality means?
Yeah, I guess.
I think it's okay. I think it's it depends on the company, right? I think quality for an individual company, it's different for every company, is what I'm trying to say. What quality means, right? Whether it's like, do they align culturally? Do they have the skill set? It's like all those things. But like, if you in your mind have this candidate who is a quality candidate who fits the persona to the T, like, how do you measure that?
From a standpoint of, are you talking about measuring one candidate, or measuring how often you're getting candidates that
how
fit?
often you're getting that? Like, so like we have, instead of like a quality, let's say quality over quantity. So instead of going like we had 400 applicants for this role, you look at, we had 7 quality candidates that came from this source, and we need to do more of that. That's what I'm trying to get at, is like, I posted about this today, but I really believe that volume is not a recruiter's friend, and that companies really need to push hard on decreasing volume to alleviate the pressure that you've just described, increase candidate experience, and all the things that recruiters really, really want to be doing right now, but they can't. And I'm just like, how do you think about quality, I guess, is a better question.
So from the traditional recruiting view, it was, what we strive for with our clients is we want to shoot them as few candidates as possible on their end. I guess this is different because I'm talking about from a third party recruiting perspective, right?
Yeah.
So our job is to make our clients' lives easier, because they're getting 100 to 200 people applying to jobs, and by the time they vet through them, it's just difficult because a lot of them aren't going to fit. Everything we do at this point is very much headhunting. So like, ideally, if we send a client 3 to 5 candidates, we're going to hope that 80% of them are people they're going to want to talk to, right? So how we judge ourselves is very much on how on the mark we are with that. I think that if you're judging things internally, as an internal recruiter, like your job as a recruiter is always, you're the filter, whether you're internal, whether you're external. Like, it's your job to make things easier for the hiring manager or the person trying to get the job done. So no matter how you slice it, part of your job is how many people can get, of the people who pass through you to go to the hiring manager, how many did that hiring manager actually want to interview?
Okay.
So that's probably the best metric from a recruitment perspective. But as I mentioned before, from a hiring perspective, it doesn't take everything into account still, right? So if you're talking from, I guess it also depends what your other kind of initiatives are, right? So if you're, I would think you need to develop some sort of metric or some sort of way, content wise, to, kind of, as you mentioned, reduce the amount of people applying to your jobs. I think you have to, I think you can use content as a way of filtering, both selling and filtering out self-selectively. So when candidates come to your site or when they come to check out what you're about, they actually have a pretty good idea if you're an organization they want to work for. I think that, and I've been thinking about this a lot, like I think companies need to do a better job of articulating, one, what they really do. Because I don't know how many times I go to a company website, I have no idea what they do.
Right.
Everything's very esoteric, and I can't tell if that's intentional or if that's the product marketing people like just assume everyone knows what they're talking about. Two, I think that I'm big on third party validation.
Okay.
So we always ask, like, we frequently ask people to review us on G2 or Google Jobs or like any of those other sites and stuff like that. And I think that or Glassdoor, whatever kind of is out there. I think that companies, I think getting other people to tell your story for you is important.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be good that comes with the bad, but I think that's kind of another kind of way of filtering things out. I think, and I also think that, kind of, we talked about DEI for a bit, I think that you need to take a hard look at where your candidate pools are coming from, and are you getting involved in community groups and whatnot that kind of diversify the talent that you're evaluating. And again, these are hard things to measure, but I think that has to also be something that's kind of front-ended, kind of on this whole thing when you're looking at it from a hiring perspective.
Yeah.
And I think if you do a better job of the who you're evaluating on the front end and find ways to measure that to make sure it's kind of an acceptable level. I'd be making up numbers if I just kind of threw them out now, but still using the filters of like, what's the pass fail rate to get to interviews and to get to that yes, and then in turn to get jobs, and then kind of understanding if that from a quality perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. No, I'm serious. Like it's just something I think about a lot. I was, talking about like getting candidates to opt in or out. So recently, like we do like ongoing research with candidates to like continually figure out what they want. And just recently, senior engineer, who you introduced me to, thank you, gave like some really great feedback, which is, I believe, consistent across the market when it comes to engineers, is that they don't have the time to talk to the wrong people. And neither do recruiters. But engineers are just like, they want to choose. They're not applying for every job out there because it's like, it takes them time. Most of them are currently employed too. And so they want that. They want the ability to like receive a piece of content or messaging or whatever that is like super transparent. So it's like no BS, does not waste their time, because if they do choose to move forward, it means it's at least initially a really, really good fit. And so at least like from the information that we continue to get, like candidates are really wanting this type of engagement. I think it's helpful on both ends.
I mean, I guess to also answer your question, then it's tying it back to what you kind of started the conversation with. I think that the only way to truly evaluate quality, or the other piece missing in terms of evaluating quality, is you have to be surveying, anonymous surveys to people who have interviewed with you, whether they got the job or not.
Yeah.
People who got to anyone who got to the interview stage, like if you build in a mechanism where you ask for their feedback, and I think that should include like, did the interview and the people you talked to, did it match what you thought of the company going in? That way you can evaluate what your messaging was, if it was actually on the mark, because you can have the greatest outbound or great messaging, but if it doesn't actually match with who you talk to and it's a completely different message, like that's something you want to know about.
Yeah.
But secondly, like it could be overselling or underselling. So either way, you can kind of make that adjustment. But also too, I think that knowing, understanding how, what the candidate experience was from there's a lot of cases where candidates end up declining a job and it's not all bad. You know what I mean? So understanding kind of what they liked about it or why they are declining it. That way you can kind of better understand how you should vet. So I would say that's probably, because I think that more companies are probably comfortable with, a lot of companies are only now like getting the whole, like we have to do employee surveys, right? Like I would like how many aren't even doing that, and maybe just started getting around to it. Maybe started doing it recently, but I can guarantee not many are actually doing surveys for people they interviewed with or had interview. And I think the amount of information you can glean there, qualitatively, just to bring it back to the title of today's show, it's pretty tremendous. Because like once you start kind of seeing similarities in the feedback loop there, then you can start kind of better understanding, from a both hiring and recruiting perspective when you're on the mark or off the mark.
Yeah. I think you just have to be really curious about what is compelling people to like want more and to engage more and to like actually accept. Like we created this survey that is it's content specific. So it's to be sent to new hires. I've posted about it. I can share if anybody wants to message me about it. I'll share the post with them because I actually like listed out the questions to ask. And so it's not like your traditional like new hire survey. It is a survey to send to new hires to specifically find out how much your employer branding work, specifically content, cause them to like both engage and accept. And so that's a good way to like just start figuring out like, hey, is this stuff working? What pieces are working? Which ones aren't? Things like that. It's like a lot of it's like testing, and it's not like the sexiest, right? It's not like a dashboard that's going to show you like all these numbers, but I think it really does have like the biggest impact, and you can see where like the connection is, but you just have to talk to people.
Yeah, I like this. What's fun about today, like in the past, we've really prepped for a lot of these conversations, whereas today, like I don't think we give each other any heads up whatsoever what our points are going to be. But I'm thinking more about like the idea of like doing widespread, anonymous feedback things on candidates who interviewed, regardless if they got the job or not, because I think that would also affect the way that recruiters go about their job.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That would make them think differently about the quality of the conversation they're having, because they're not just trying to get off the phone to get to the next candidate. They're trying to also make sure they leave the best possible impression. They're also trying to make sure they are articulating things accurately. They're making sure they have become, kind of an expert on the business and the initiatives and everything else. That way, they're doing the best job from a not just getting information, but giving it back. And look into that more.
And I think companies need to do a better job of alleviating the pressure that recruiters are feeling, which makes them skip steps purely because they're just being held to like crazy numbers and crazy volume. It's just, I don't think
the rec load thing. It's just, if I went like 9 times out of 10, it's too high at most companies. It's just that's where companies skimp. And I know that recruiting is expensive. This is me, the recruiter, saying, people need to spend more, but I'm not even talking about like us. It's just that poor experience mostly often the time comes from excessive workload or poor internal kind of communication where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And, there is no feedback to give. So, but anyway.
Yeah. All right.
So we got anything else for this one, or we just put this one? We actually went longer than I thought we would. So that was.
I know. Yeah. Go figure.
All right. Well, sounds good, everybody. That's a wrap for the Employer Content Show. If you want to hear more of what Nate and I have to say, you can subscribe to the HireWell channel on YouTube, where we have a playlist of all of our episodes, and the Talent Insights podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Nate, pleasure as always, and everyone out there, we'll see you soon.
Thanks, man. Bye.